The presence and persistence of suffering is one of the biggest challenges to belief in a loving and powerful God. All humans experience some forms of suffering in this life. Some suffering is the result of natural processes. Some suffering is the result of what humans intentionally do to each other and to the planet. Suffering is definitely not distributed evenly. Some people suffer quite a lot more than other people, and the degree that someone experiences suffering is definitely not based on what someone somehow deserves. This video makes the point that God is not controlling everything. There is randomness and resistance from the start. People have wrestled with the question of God's love and power as they relate to suffering for thousands of years, and there are different proposals for how to resolve the logical tensions. Some try to show that suffering doesn't really exist, that it's mainly in people's minds and their responses to life. Some claim that God doesn't exist, that ideas of God are social and psychological coping mechanisms for dealing with a suffering reality. Some try to show that while God is real and God is powerful, maybe God's just not all that good. And others will argue that God is loving but not powerful in the way that classical theism often imagines God, that God can more or less do anything. Some viewers may wonder, what could this straight American so-called able-bodied white guy possibly know about suffering? That's a fair question. There are forms of suffering, especially in the social sphere, that I cannot even fathom. I have no idea what it's like to be part of an excluded group in an apartheid society. I have no idea what it's like to be a slave, or a civilian whose home and family is bombed just for existing. There are countless forms of suffering that I simply cannot fathom because I've never experienced them. I have experienced suffering though. I've put some examples of that in the comment below. I'm not going to try and solve this dilemma that faith has wrestled with for thousands of years. All I seek to do is provide one thought that may be of help to someone wrestling with this deep and difficult question. As usual, I'll try to provide the thought with some references to some Bible passages. Let me first state which route this thought takes. First, it does not take the route of denying the reality of suffering. While I certainly believe that the way people respond to life circumstances can exacerbate suffering, suffering is not an illusion. It is real, and it is often way beyond our control. Second, I don't take the route that God doesn't exist. While the phenomena of suffering and the questions it raises doesn't necessarily enhance my belief in God's existence, it doesn't deplete my belief either. My own reasons for belief in God's existence come from other considerations. Third, I don't take the route that God is not good or not loving. I think that God is way more mysterious than any one religious tradition can contain, and I also think that every religious tradition very imperfectly reflects truth about God, including the Bible. Nonetheless, I find the core message of the New Testament to emanate from something beyond humanity and which calls humanity to deeper paths of love, goodness, and communion. It completely redefines power for us and seeks to shape human imagination in the ways of self-giving and connectedness to all that exists. If Jesus has anything to do with revealing the character of God, and I think he does, God really is revealed to be radical love for the hope and life of all that is. I'll put videos in the description related to God's goodness and love. That being said, questioning God or pouring out your real and raw feelings towards God, usually known as the practice of lament, is extremely faithful. It is a faithful act to come before God with our pain in all of its rawness and realness and be honest with God about how we feel. Lament is an act of faith. Read through any of the lament psalms. They radically question God and even at times accuse God of unfaithfulness. These psalms were preserved by communities as examples of faithful ways to pray. Nevertheless, I think God is ultimate goodness and love, even in the face of the world's great suffering. How? To me, it makes the most sense to deny the unlimited power of God, or at least to redefine what is meant by God's power. Here are some silly examples. We know that God can't literally do anything, like make a square circle or create a rock so big that God can't lift it. Those are just logical impossibilities. Obviously, God can't do them. But that raises the question, where exactly is the line of what God can't do? Could God just come wipe out all the evil on our planet in some great act of tremendous power? Maybe, but then what would be left? Would we be left at all if God did that? Could God just somehow force us to not be evil beings and do things to each other that cause great suffering, like exploitation and war? Maybe God could, but would we still be ourselves? Would we still really be human, or more like fleshy robots? Wherever one draws the line on what God can't do, it must be drawn somewhere. The unanswerable question is, where? For the question of the relation between God's love and the reality of suffering, I find the following thought about God's power to be helpful. God, if God exists, has certain goals for creation. Fundamentally, two core goals are that intelligent beings would be both A, free, and B, loving, or if you prefer good or holy or righteous, basically that they would treat each other and all that exists with dignity and respect and mutuality and kindness. Basically treat each other the way that one wants to be treated. Of course, one problem here is that if intelligent beings are free, they have the option of being unloving. If God forces beings to be loving, well then they're not exactly free, and if they're forced, they're not exactly loving either. So God does not have the power to generate life in such a way that all beings are instantaneously both free and loving creatures. That is a logical impossibility on the level of making 2 + 2 = 7. However, to reach God's goals, God could create free beings who are capable of becoming totally loving through their own experiences, choices, and desires. Meaning, God could guide free beings into the fullness of life that is love. If such beings, through their own experiences and desires, come to cherish the ideals of love and to seek to live in such a way towards all that exists, such creatures would be both free and loving. I think it can be helpful to think of this whole life with all of its beauty and pain as God's way of generating creatures who will be eternally free and eternally loving. Let's say that at the end of history, we all find ourselves alive again in a new, strange way. Let's say everything was beautiful and there was no pain, no suffering, no evil. And let's say an opportunity for evil presented itself to us somehow in this new life. We could imagine a world in which no one would take the opportunity for evil because we all know already where such a path leads, because we have an entire cosmic history of experience with it. This kind of thought comes through in the Bible all over the place. Take the story of the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden, for example. Scholars come to pretty different interpretations of the meaning of the story, which is one of the beautiful things about story. I think one legitimate way to see the story is within the paradigm I'm describing. In Genesis 2, God creates a garden, creates the first man and woman, and the garden produces the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God instructs the couple not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We know how the story goes. They do eventually eat from the tree, and presumably, had they not eaten from that tree, they would have stayed in the garden long enough to eat from the tree of life. But when they eat from the wrong tree, they're banished from the garden. I take this story to be something like theological myth, but that doesn't decrease its meaning, it enhances its meaning and significance. If this is theological reflection on the nature of humanity, what could these two different trees represent? That's one beauty of narrative, that there's no singular settled meaning. It speaks meaningfully in different ways to different cultures and populations in different times and spaces. In reflecting on the story's meaning in the context of this video, I think the trees can represent something like this. The tree of life represents simple obedience to the wise instructions of the creator of the cosmos. If humanity chooses to listen to this voice, it will partner with God in continuing to create a glorious and harmonious creation, and things will go really well at that level of partnership with God. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, on the other hand, represents humanity's desire to discern for themselves what is good and what is evil. The humans won't be told what is good and what is evil. They will see for themselves, thank you very much. And so human history begins with humans determined to determine for themselves how to make the best lives for themselves on this planet. From everything we can see in human history, the results have been poor. While human life is full of beauty and goodness and love and care and cooperation and kindness, it's also filled with greed and hatred and ignorance and exploitation and war and conquest and subjugation and genocide and more. We humans have gotten what we asked for from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because now we know. We know what goodness looks like, and unfortunately, we know what evil looks like. We wanted to determine and to know for ourselves what is good and what is evil, and after a few hundred millennia, now we know. But now that we know, we can stop eating from this tree and move on to feasting from the tree of life. It's almost like the story is saying, before humanity knew that what it really wanted is the tree of life, it had to taste the bitterness of the other tree first to get to that point. So, if we were to ask what will be different about the next age that God will establish in humanity's development, we could ask, why would what happened in Genesis 3, where humanity chooses its own way to its own harm, not just be repeated at the start of the next age? We could respond, well, by that point, humanity will have been there, done that, and gotten the t-shirt, so to speak. It now knows that it does not like the fruit of the wrong kind of tree. Imagine a scene at the start of the new age and someone standing there comes along and says, "Hey everybody, let's eat from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil." People will by that time want to have nothing to do with such an idea. In fact, this is how the highly metaphorical book of Revelation ends. The last scene of the last book of the Bible, which purports to describe the ultimate future, is filled with multiple trees of life that surround a river running through the city. The leaves of the trees of life are for the healing of the nations. The closing scene of the Bible is parallel to the opening scene of the Bible. In Revelation, humanity is in a garden again, but it's now a city garden. God is there, humanity is there, and multiple trees of life are there. You know what is completely absent? Any hint of a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That tree does not need to be represented in this scene because at that point it will not be a threat to the human species or the well-being of the cosmos. God will have succeeded at generating creatures who are both free and who choose to be totally loving because it has experienced that other darker side of human possibility and has come to reject it unambiguously and with utmost certainty. Another famous passage that displays this kind of thought is Jesus' parable of the prodigal son in Luke 15. One son, who represents humanity, wants his inheritance early before his father has even died, because he wants to travel the world and live in luxury with it. He comes to find out how quickly money can go, however, and comes to work for a farmer. He was in such a desperate situation that he wanted to eat what was being fed to the pigs, which for Jewish tradition would be completely unthinkable. So the son goes home. It was the pain of experiencing the consequences of his choices that led the son, or humanity, to choose to be home. Or take these statements from Paul. He says, "We do not lose heart. Even though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For our slight, momentary affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure. Because we look at not what can be seen, but at what cannot be seen. For what can be seen is temporary, but what cannot be seen is eternal." Paul thinks this age is an arena in which we become morally equipped for the next one, through experiencing the human-made disasters of this age and rejecting them as good or beautiful. Or take this hugely important passage from Romans 8, which was explored last video. He says, "I consider that the sufferings of the present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God." That's a mouthful. Okay, in the first sentence, Paul is just comparing the present to the future and claiming that the glory of the future will far, far outweigh the pain of the present, as hard as that may be to believe. Next, he says that the creation itself is longing for the children of God to be revealed, Or in other words, creation is longing for the people who share God's values of love and cooperation and mutuality and working for the goodness of the whole rather than just individual selves. Creation itself longs for this because it itself is suffering under the current form and path of humanity. He goes on to say that creation itself, including humans, was subjected to futility. This means that creation as a whole does not function as God intends it to. It is malfunctioning, and it was subject to this state. If it didn't subject itself to this state, who or what subjected it? Some have claimed that maybe it was the devil or maybe it was Adam that subjected it to futility. But for Paul, the one subjecting creation to futility is doing so in hope of creation's ultimate freedom. Such a one with this capacity and this motivation has to be the one whom we call God. God subjected creation to futility, to its malfunctioning state, in the hope that it would lead to creation's freedom. How does that make sense? How can an environment of futility lead to an environment of freedom? For Paul, humanity became futile in its thinking when it decided it wanted to listen to itself as a creature rather than listen to God as creator. What such futile thinking leads to is wickedness, evil, covetousness, malice. Humans are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, craftiness. They are gossips, slanderers, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Jeez, that seems kind of harsh, but in reality, humanity really is a very mixed bag of a species, at least at this point in cosmic history. So, because of humanity's futile ways of thinking and acting that lead towards all kinds of tension and pain and disaster, God gives humanity an environment suitable for their chosen path of existence. And ultimately, it means God gives humanity a world of their own making. All God had to do to subject creation to futility was let humans do what they themselves wanted to do. So now our malfunctioning global environment shows us the exact fruit of our collectively malfunctioning hearts, minds, and hands. The hope is that we will see the sources of the malfunction and want to eradicate them ourselves. And God walks with humanity through its different imperfect traditions to guide them to just that outcome. It's through our experience of pain that we move to worlds beyond pain, because such experience leads us to identify and reject the source of pain, which is our own collectively malfunctioning selves. In addition to what was said last video, this is also part of what Paul means by saying God works all things together for good. Even though God doesn't cause our pain, because humans have made the world we live in, God does use it eventually to move us to life beyond pain. This does not mean humans are free to not work on improving conditions for those who suffer in this life by any and all means. It is such loving resistance to suffering that becomes the building blocks of a future beyond suffering. This theology is not a call to wait, it's a call to work now for the good of all in the name of ultimate goodness. This theology also strongly rejects any notion that people suffer in accordance with what they deserve. It's often the case that the righteous suffer deeply and the wicked live carefree lives. Jesus himself is a prime example, someone who lived promoting love and kindness and compassion and was executed by the state who had different values. Jesus made sure that we know that in God's right side up kingdom, the first will be last and the last will be first. This theology does not claim that all suffering has some kind of immediate observable reason for it. Often it is completely random and doesn't lead to anything good within this lifetime. I think a good way to end this video is with a good quote from Keith Ward. He has a nuanced chapter on divine causality in relation to suffering. After making many points about different kinds and causes of suffering, he writes this: "Perhaps all one can say is that in the world to come, such suffering will cease. We will see then how our suffering has been necessary to the existence of a cosmos like ours, and that it has come upon us not by specific design or intention, but rather as a result of general laws which operate without any reference to us in particular. It will always be part of our personal history, and it will therefore always be part of our unique experience. but its intensity and its debilitating influence will fade. When and only when that happens, we will begin to be able to use that past experience in a positive way, as it gives us greater understanding of the terrible and beautiful possibilities of being, and enables us to share in a unique way in the mind of God, who knows all evils and who incorporates and transforms them within the infinite beatitude of the divine being. If you get any value from this content, give us a thumbs up. Check out related videos linked in the description, and never give up hope.